Welcome all. To understand the metamorphosis of learning ecosystem and how these leaders contributed to expand horizons of innovation for progressive development, I now invite Ms. Prajakta Kalaglekar, Senior Director and Talent Development Leader at Flipkart. She has also been recipient of Young HR Leader 2019 and 2018 HR 40 Under 40 awards. Prior to Flipkart, Ma'am has worked with GE as Leadership Program Manager, South Asia, and was responsible for developing and implementing strategies to grow the leadership programs in India. With Ma'am, we also have on stage Mr. Prasenjit Bhattacharya, founder and director, Great Place to Work, which is known for its strong, sustainable build and high trust, high performance culture. He is co founder and CEO of Great Manager Institute, which was founded in 2017 to make the process of people manager development scalable. And lastly, we have a panelist, Mr. Anand Shankar, Director, Tata Management Tata Center. He has always made sure that values and fabric of TMTC has remained the same for all these years and has constantly worked for aligning the future needs and requirements for the organization. It is indeed my honor, dear speakers, to have you and to introduce you. Now, the stage is all yours. We are eagerly waiting to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isha. It's a pleasure to be here and a privilege to be here, especially with Anand and Prasanjit. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really thrilled here to be discussing a topic which is close to my heart, which is around metamorphosis of our learning ecosystem. Anand and I are bringing in the perspective from the organization, and Prasanjit is bringing in perspectives from deep research on people managers, employee experience, right? And learning has been constantly evolving and transforming over the last few years. COVID, especially, has had a significant impact on the speed at which learning interventions, as well as methodologies, and even technologies have had to pivot, right? More than 1 billion jobs, almost one third of all jobs worldwide, are likely to be transformed by technology in the next decade, according to OECD. According to the World Economic Forum, 42% of core skills within roles on an average are expected to change, right, by this year. In a recent McKinsey global study, 87% of executives said they were experiencing skill gaps in the workforce or were expecting them over the next few years. So, with this as the context of our discussion today, let me ask Anand, you the first question to get us started. TMTC has been a pioneer, in in-house institution for learning. And what trends are you personally passionate about, and how are you driving those changes in L&D at the Tatas?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Praj, and good afternoon, Prasenjit. It's wonderful to be chatting with the two of you, and thank you, NHRDN, for inviting us to share some of our thoughts from the Tata Group in this very prestigious forum, where we're talking about a topic that's very close to many people's hearts, including mine, which is the changing nature of learning, and as we call it, the metamorphosis of learning under the overall umbrella of human resources. Um, if you don't mind, Project, I'm going to give you a little bit of context, and then I'll come to the question that you asked, if
Perfect.
that's okay. While I currently, yes, I am leading the Tata Management Training Center, and I'll certainly come to how we have adapted as some people call us the second oldest corporate university in the world. We started sometime in the 50s. We moved into the premises that we are in the 1960s. And this is a result of the vision of our founder, J.R.D. Tata. Well, and I'll talk a little bit about that to do two things. One is to talk about what an amazing vision the great man had on everything, obviously the country, the businesses of the country, etc., but also on learning and development of people. And I'll come to that in a minute. But before that, my background for the last 27 years, I'm a recent entrant into the Tata Group. I've been here all of 6 or 7 months. But prior to this, I used to work in the consulting field for about 27, 30 years, most of which I've spent outside of India. And Prasenjit will agree to this, and so will you, Prajakta, that with your experience in GE as well, that this, out of all the human resources, let's say sub functions or sub areas, learning has moved at a breakneck speed. We might not feel it because we are living it on a daily basis. Yes, there have been leaps in HR technology. Yes, there have been leaps in, let's say, what do you call, org design, or but comp and ben, if you, for example, has gone along at a particular speed, or things like that. I don't want to make comparisons here, so it's not like a competition, but the point is that learning has just completely metamorphosized, and it keeps doing over and over again. And I'll give you some examples, and I'll come to TMTC. The half life of a skill, as all of us watching this and listening in know, has reduced from whatever it was, 10, 12 years before. The half life of a skill has now become anywhere between 4 to 6 years, which means in anywhere between 4 to 6 years, anything that you know today as a skill is going to become obsolete, right? So that's the speed with which our skills are going out of not fashion, but certainly out of utilitarian value, and therefore it is incumbent upon every individual, organization, and manager to continuously rediscover and reinvent ourselves and relearn as a matter of fact. Now, very many of us as learning professionals and HR professionals have heard of this whole OSF, which is the on the job, social, and formal approaches to learning, right? Which I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 20, 25 years ago, the Center for Creative Leadership, there were three principal researchers who are typically credited, McCall, Lombardo, and Morrison. um, they came up with this split of 70-20-10. 70% of our learning comes from on the job, 20% comes from social or exposure or interactions, and 10% comes from actual formal learning, if you will. Formal can be educational or whatever, but formal. But here's the thing: if you read the latest report by Training Industry, which is a leading research firm, as you all know, they are saying that the validity of that has remained intact for quite a while, but over a period of time, that has started changing, and it's now standing at 55, 25, 20 for employees. And here's the rub. Here's the point that I want to focus on. And it's gone to 41, 31, 29 as far as executives are concerned. And this is a global phenomenon. What does that mean? It means that just, let's take executives, just working on your job is not going to help you learn the skills that you require to take the organization forward, to become a better leader or a better manager any longer. It's not, so that 70% is now become 41%, which means the significant up is on the formal learning front, and certainly a lot more on the exposure and social front. So a full 29%, remember, it's going up from 10% to 29%. And that's a huge leap, which means that executives can't sit um, on their backsides anymore and say that, no, as long as I'm working hard, as long as I'm, doing my projects and whatever it is, learning is happening to me, and I'm no. You've got to get out of it. You've got to look for new skills, because even we don't know what's around the corner. And this is the context with which I want to bring back the great man, J.R.D. Tata, who said, and it's there, we have, I'm sitting in the TMTC campus. We have the Tata archives, the global archives here. His handwritten speech that he used to inaugurate this campus in 1960, whatever, is still there. And he says that he believes the TMTC is being founded for three reasons. One is to help the Tata managers and employees get access to world class faculty and resources. Two is for them to meet with each other and understand each other's issues, challenges, and opportunities. And three is to provide a safe venue for them to network. He didn't use the word networking, he said fraternize and create a sense of camaraderie. Now, even if we were to wipe the sheet clean and hire the best of consulting firms and try to come up with a vision for any corporate university today, I don't think we can beat that. That principally should drive, and it certainly drives TMTC, it should drive any corporate university. And what I'm trying to say here is that the vision and the purpose with which we exist hasn't changed, but the modalities, the technology that we use, what we do, all of that is changing at a fairly rapid pace. So I'll tell you, 3,500 to 4,000 people. We have a lovely campus here, and we have classrooms, residential facilities, etc. Pretty much like Crotonville would project that, for example. It's at a smaller scale, obviously here, but 3,500 to 4,000 managers and leaders used to come and attend programs every year here. Now, with the advent of digital learning, not because of COVID, but even before that, maybe about 4 years ago, the Tata Group invested very heavily in digital learning. The number has gone up exponentially. Today, we are touching anywhere between 40 to 70,000 in a year of actual formal learning that is happening, and that's been possible through technology, as all of us know. And this is seriously part of the original learning curriculum of each of these organizations. And as you all know, the Tata Group is not a singular monolithic organization. It consists of salt to software, small to large, very diverse industries, very diverse organizations, very diverse ages, and demographics, and the customer focus, and all of that. But, and here's the point that I'll stop with and hand over back to you. When you talk about the focus of TMTC, there are two parts to it. There's the skill, and we certainly work on the cognitive skill building. And also, there is the softer aspect. You could call it behavior. It could be about the Tata culture. It could be about the Tata code of conduct and our ethics and our values. But we believe that one cannot exist in isolation without the other. And therefore, for us, learning in and of itself means a holistic approach to helping our employees, our talented managers and leaders, and everybody else take the exponential leap into the great unknown. And a lot of that great unknown is by self discovery. I'll leave it there, and I'll come back and opine on a couple of other things. But Prajakta, I'm sure you want to hear what Prasenjit and your own points of view as well on this learning. So I'll pause here. Hopefully, I've given you a quick flavor of what we're all about, and then I'll come back and talk a little more.
Sure, Anand. I think absolutely brilliant. I think a few takeaways for me. One is about the half-life of skills, right, which is now 4 to 6 years. Second is the entire 70-20-10 principle, which is getting pushed, which is getting challenged, and which we need to rethink in terms of how we look at our own development. And third is in terms of the view that you bring in on how to look at both skill development and behaviors or values, right? So we'll get deeper into that subsequently. But Prasenjit, coming to you, because we started talking more broadly about the ecosystem, right? One of the things that, at Flipkart as well, we built out a 3-year strategy. We built out North Stars in terms of where do we see learning going? How do we enable the business capability building as well, along with, helping our future leaders succeed, right? One of the key things that keeps coming up in research is around mindsets. And I wanted to get your opinion, especially because of the kind of work you're into, to throw some light on what is your opinion on mindsets, which mindsets, in your opinion, are important. How do you see that kind of shaping learning for people managers, employees, or organizations?
I think that's a very good question, Raj. And in my opinion, the second part of the topic, the learning ecosystem, is critical because the ecosystem actually produces the kind of behavior that leads to learning or does not lead to learning. And just to give you a very quick example, about 3.5 years back, much before COVID, I was in the town hall of a very large IT company in Bangalore, and there were 1,000 plus people. And I asked this very simple question: how many of you have spent 5,000 rupees or more in the last 1 month to go out for entertainment, maybe dinner or, uh, watching a movie or whatever you did. And almost 80-90% hands went up. Everyone has spent 5,000 bucks. Then the next question that I asked is, how many of you spent 500 rupee from your pocket in the last 1 month to do something which is like self-development, which is to build your own capability? And that could be maybe I bought a book or something like that. And there were 10% or less number of hands, and I had kept the threshold deliberately quite low. And this was in one of the best workplaces. And the assumption still was that, we are really great people, we learn really fast, but the organization is going to tell us what to learn, how to learn, what kind of competency profile. So I see three broad shifts. This is not the first metamorphosis. There has been two others that has already happened in the past. I think the first was, if we really look back to people of our generation, or the or older, we call this generation the no vacancy generation. There weren't jobs available. You had a no vacancy sign in front, and therefore the market was for job security. And what was driving people, or the currency in that market, was power. Because if you happen to get into a good organization or a government service, then you became very powerful. You would probably retire from there. And implicit in that generation was an assumption that you sacrifice in the present for unnamed future rewards, right? क्योंकि बहू भी कभी सास बनेगी, and that kind of a feeling. So everybody worked hard. Nobody knew what exactly they're getting in return in the near future. So their boss was the all-powerful teacher. So I'm connecting it with the context of learning. So therefore, boss also had far more experience than you had, and therefore you were dependent. And of course, that things change, supply demand equation changed, and therefore you had holdings that went up. We are hiring, walk-in interview, and so on and so forth. And Great Place to Work is one of the beneficiaries of that change in the power dynamics. And then what we had was what I call, in a positive sense, the entitled generation. The market now was for employee experience, and the currency was career growth. So employees were really, really bright, and they would say that they would expect the right experience. People said we had multi-cuisine restaurants. So the no vacancy generation could not understand the entitled generation, either in office or at their home. And therefore, we had this huge issues when you do an employee engagement survey, that the top 2% people, let us say 300 people in an organization of large size who have ESOPs, etc., are working 24 by 7. They are pretty happy and they're pretty inspired, but 70% of their people, unfortunately, are pretty young. And what also happened is that the boss is no longer the all-powerful teacher, because that 70-20-10 that Anand referred to, there was another teacher that entered into the scene. I call that teacher Uncle Google, because everybody had an Uncle Google, and it doesn't matter you had 20 years experience in electrical engineering. At least from a knowledge perspective, I don't depend on you anymore. And what we, however, told our people is that, even though the teacher has become less powerful or your boss has become less powerful, we'll give you a curriculum, we'll give you an exam, you crack it, and you have a great career. Now, this is what has changed now. Even before COVID, uh, people knew about a few things. Big fat organizations are dead. It doesn't matter, Infosys, TCS, Cognizant. It's not that they have become small, but for every $1 million increase in revenue, they will progressively hire less and less number of people. And we all know the reasons, that technology and analytics. And for a lot of us believe that the individual's ability to cope with the rate of change today is, for the first time, is behind in terms of the rate of change. In this context, HR quickly became employee experience and sales function, and extrinsic rewards were less and less effective. During our time, there was a movie called Roti Kapra Makan, where I remember Zeenat Aman sang a song saying, "Tere do takiye ke nokri mein mera लाखों का सावन जाए." Now people were asking the same question, that why should I sacrifice in the present for unnamed future rewards? And it is in this context that how can this generation look at learning? Because they are not believing you when you say that we give you job security. and they are not even believing you when you are saying that we have this great leadership framework. In 10 years you can be there, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the key question that I think we are discussing and debating, and maybe you can build on this question that in this context, what is this generation? I call this generation the startup generation. I think the market has shifted from employee experience to employee relevance. And this generation is looking for relevance. They've figured out that the half life of your skill or competency is reducing, and therefore, uh, I have no hesitation in saying my son works with Amazon, and I sent him a small news report that said Amazon is not really a great place to work. And I said, hello, what's your experience? He said, Dad, the kind of market value that Amazon is giving me, I am unlikely to get in many other places. And he said he added a additional line with a wink. He said it's a great place to be from. And I think organizations will have to really retune their strategies to tell their employees that you have an opportunity here to stay relevant, but a lot depends on whether the employee has the mindset to move from passive to active. And I wish I can, and probably I will, go back to the same company in the same town hall and ask people, how much money did you spend from your pocket on your self development today, Prajakta?
Thanks, Prasanjit. I think well said. A lot of key takeaways. I think no vacancy generation, entitled generation, startup generation, and kind of taking new themes away. And also the whole movement from employee experience to employee relevance that you're talking about as well, right? And the mindset required to become a lot more active about your own learning. So we'll come back to that. I think let me pick up Anand where we left off a little bit to build on what Prasanjit was also saying, because I think one of the things about learning is that how do you make the learning relevant for employees? And when you talk about both behavioral skills, functional skills, it is all about relevance to the employee, right? And there are different, I think, schools of thought on whether to do micro segmentation, not do, right? All of those elements as well. What is your take on it when you think about this learning ecosystem and making it relevant for employees?
Great. I think it's a question that's been swirling around in different contextual frameworks for a very long period of time. So let me explain what I mean by that. That is that if an organization is training somebody on skills or product knowledge, it is for the organization's immediate need, that you need to get productive today. And you need to understand this today. You need to apply this with the customer today. You need to make sure that you make money today using this. That's the organization's primary perspective, right? The employee and the relevance that Prasanjit is talking about. Yes, absolutely. I need to understand this skill for today, but how am I preparing for my tomorrow? That's why Prasanjit's son and the Amazon example comes alive, right? They are saying that, okay, I'm getting more productive today, which is the organization's prerogative. Obviously, they're paying me for that and all of that, so I'll get training. Now, the happiest marriage will be one where if the organization, what they're training me as an employee on, will increase my individual relevance. Here's the paradox: the more value that you add to my CV and the more marketable you make me, the longer I will stay with you. Right, so let's think about that for a minute. It is not that the more valuable you make me, I'll immediately run away, because I know the next year you're going to continue making me valuable, and then you'll continue making me valuable. So it's not just about the organization's productivity, it's also about my relevance in the larger context. And then how do you marry it? But it is not an easy marriage to achieve. It's easy to articulate, and like any marriages, the theory is easier than the actual everyday living and the execution. And therefore organizations need to, in a way, I think, and what we're trying to do our level best with is make whatever learning we have business relevant, right? It has to be absolutely business relevant, but skill driven, which means that the employee has to see that this is actually adding value to me. right? So I'll give you an example. There's a large B2B business of ours that's pivoting, that's transforming, okay? And for that, they need their employees to execute on certain skills, which hitherto they didn't have, right? Not for their fault or the organization's fault. It's just that the business has changed, the environment has changed, the speed has increased, etc. So, for a variety of good reasons, the organization is working on capability building. If they don't do anything for the next 3 years, they'll be okay. But they realize that 3 years from now, there's going to be a dip. Employees also see that. And therefore, they're preparing the resilience building of the organization through individual resilience building. And that is what I'm talking about, this happy marriage. So the employee is also riveted by it, completely committed, saying that, okay, this is going to really, really continue building on the relevance part of it. But the organization also knows that it's future investing. It's not the here and now, right? Yes, the here and now is also important and we need to continue investing on it. But what is around the corner? Right. So that is one. The second paradox, and I'll hand it over back to you. The second paradox is that a lot of our learning in all organizations, I'm sure for everybody here, whether it's educational institutions or us, commercial organizations, NGOs, became went online. Right, just give me one second. Sorry, I'm really emotional about this point.
Anytime. I love
Um, but here's the rub. The more digital we went, the more we could cover, the more we could do, the more we could accomplish. But the more the yearning has become for coming back into physical. I'll leave it there.
I know that there will be different points of view there for sure, because I have a team that has Gen Zs, millennials, and not boomers though. But yeah, it's something where people are still debating whether they want hybrid working, they want completely remote working. So that's a topic for another day. But very very interesting paradoxes, Anand, and completely resonate with you on that, because one of the things I was reflecting on as you were talking was the fact that in Flipkart, what we've done is we've kind of aligned our learning strategy to the business strategy so that they work hand in hand and help the business with future capability. And because you're working on future capability, it is also about making employees marketable and relevant, right? So it kind of helps the both aspects of the paradox that you were talking about.
May I just chime in with one quick point, and
Yeah, please go ahead.
just to that triggered another thought. One is, the classic what all of us are doing, which is here's my business strategy, here's my people strategy, and therefore my learning strategy. Now the thing is that very often in many of our businesses, that business strategy itself is very fuzzy right now. Nobody knows what's going to happen 3 years later or 5 years later. When I started working, and I don't want to date myself here, we used to make something called 5-year plans and budgets. You just don't do that anymore. I mean, even if you do, it's more for a whatever exercise, academic exercise. But the point is that you can't even do annual plans because of the speed with which things are changing. So whatever it is that's going to remain anchored and pivot, solid is one thing, and then the pivot. But the reason I jumped in very quickly is very often what we are finding is we are using learning to define the business strategy. This particular organization, the B2B thing that I was talking about, they're using these learning sessions to give action learning projects where they're saying, you go learn, build the capability, build the plan, and come back to us. So it's not that I've got it all figured out as a leader and now I need you to go do this, this, this. And that's what I think is really exciting for him. It's daunting. It's absolutely daunting for middle management and senior management to say that, oh my God, I'm going to go into a learning situation. I need to come up with actual plans that will actually be implemented when you actually see that. And these are not the traditional action learning projects of efficiency gain and 10% this and maybe one new market expansion and not playing at the fringes. This is new product sets, new completely bursting the bubble on various strongly held beliefs by the organization, etc. So we're finding a lot of flip happening also, where learning, not the learning strategy, but the actual learning is driving the learning strategy, which is in turn pushing the business strategy into different directions. Sorry, I'll
Yeah.
hand it over back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Prasanjit, you wanted to add something.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting paradox, and I'll just build on what Anand has said. Most research seems to agree that when it comes to creativity, when it comes to resilience, individuals seem to do a far better job than organizations themselves. So, it is like the digital technology was invented within Kodak, but they would not allow it to be used. Maybe Xerox invented the graphical user interface and the mouse, which Apple took and used, but they will not allow it to be used. And I think the crux here is Darwin's theory of evolution says that individuals will adapt. Not all individuals, but many of them will adapt. And the problem is, all progress, however, has to happen in organizations, within tribes, or within teams. And let me give you an example. When you give a puzzle to a 5-year-old child, or you give it to a chimp, and you give a different reward, maybe a banana or a toy, both of them seem to be able to solve fairly simple puzzles. But in 1,000 years or any number of years, you will never find two chimps carrying a log which is too heavy for one of them to carry by himself or herself. And that is the difference between organization and individuals who can adapt. And our challenge is, while we have individuals who will figure out how to adapt, as I say, not all, but many of them will, the organization structures which are built to support them are 200 years old. It is like saying that I'm going to fight COVID with a 200-year-old medicine. And those structures, the hierarchical structures where power is concentrated with few people, they don't seem to change, even though we have evidence. You have Gary Hamel has written a book called Holacracy. Ricardo Semler has talked about Maverick. We have organizations like Hire. And it doesn't change because the senior management is invested in the currency of power. Right, and therefore this is a big challenge of linking it back to the mindset challenge that we are talking about. If you continue to pay lip service to innovation, but you don't radically restructure of the kind that Anand was talking about, it is not a few CEO projects which are being done by autonomous teams, but the organization itself is changing and it's like a plethora of micro enterprises and thousands of micro entrepreneurs. And though is it possible, do those models exist? Thanks to technology, thanks to the way in which we can now make everything transparent, it is more possible today than any other time in the past. But will senior management let go of some of their power structures, or will they hold on to their rapidly, I think Gary Hamel has a very nice term called, will they be willing to write off their own depreciating intellectual capital? Because I am the CEO, I still have a need to say something on areas where my 22-year-old colleague might be better positioned. And I think this is something that we'll have to consider. Prajakta?
Thanks, Prasanjit. I think I very much resonate with what you're saying, and I think that's where my second question for you was also positioned, which is senior management, of course. But if I kind of look at people management or people development largely, broadly, and we look at the role we see our people leaders playing, right, in building this ecosystem, in kind of shaping this ecosystem, we also are in a space where we are trying to recognize call out behaviors where we see people doing that. There are situations where we're also equipping them to make them better people managers, right? So in your view, when you look at across organizations, what is the role that plays? What works, what doesn't? What are things that organizations should be doing that probably they are not, that will enable this ecosystem building, right, with people managers?
I think the role of the people managers has never been as critical, because the last 2 years has told us that it is no longer possible for HR and CEO to really create the right kind of culture without the line managers being aligned. But have we prepared those line managers for the capabilities that they require? And this is a big question, because even if you send them to mass scale training programs, there is not enough evidence of that translating into consistent behaviors on the ground. And that is where one of the biggest discoveries that we have had is that the power of rituals. And let me give you an example of what do I mean by that. And so there is this manager in a bank, and he's got a feedback in his 360 saying that he's not being collaborative. And then we came up to him and we said, these are some practices which some other branch managers are doing. One of them is called Ek Din Ka Nayak. Every alternate Friday, by rotation, one person from your team will sit on your chair. You can sit by the side and will pretend to be the branch manager. We'll do all the review meetings. Evening at 5 o'clock over samosa and tea, he or she will talk about how the branch can improve. And the manager liked the idea. Now, this doesn't require HR policy changes. It doesn't require a budget. You are not even giving away your swiping authority or anything of that kind. But this one thing, in 6 months' time, actually impacted the branch level productivity and attrition in a very, very positive manner. And this manager in his 360 started getting comments like he's trying to be collaborative. Now, what we found is that it's not good enough to give knowledge and skills to managers. You have to give them some very, very, we call it hacks. What are the hacks for the manager? For example, immediately after this meeting, I have a notification that comes to me saying that you had a calendar block with so and so. Would you like to send him or her a compliment? If I say yes, my WhatsApp will open and I can quickly say, Prajakta, that was such a interesting example that you gave. Now, of course, I have to believe in it in the first place, and the organization must be able to say that people managers who are effective people managers will be recognized and it will be a part of their talent management process, or so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to say is that for the first time today, we know that there are, for every behavior that you need, whether it is creativity, innovation, collaboration, thanking, listening, you have some very simple things that managers can do. And with technology, you can ensure that all managers can do that. And if you are doing that consistently, that's where engagement happens. That's where high trust gets converted into high performance. And it is no longer a leadership secret anymore. And on this, the last point that I'm going to make is, and we have two statements in our survey. One says, my manager keeps his promises or his or her promises. And the other one, it says that walks the talk. And I was never very sure, why do we have these two statements? And I give credit to the previous CEO of Radio City, Apurva Purohit. And she explained the difference to me. She said, when you say keep promises, you say that you achieve this quarter's target and we will give you a ping pong table in the canteen or whatever it is, and you have kept your promise. But there are some promises that cannot be kept. And she explained by saying, you have heard the Hindi song, जो वादा किया हो निभाना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि कुछ वादे ऐसे होते हैं जिसे किया नहीं जा सकता, इनको निभाना पड़ता है. So consistency in behavior over a period of time is what is leadership. And I think the last 2 years has shown that people managers, many of them, have been doing a great job in that.
Super. I think it's a great example that you just gave, and and Apurva's book also talks a lot about that. It's a wonderful example of a leader. Projekta, if you don't mind, can I just extend a point
Yeah, go ahead.
of Prasenjit's? What I really liked about it was about this manager thing. There's something I'm going to go a little double click here. There's something called a protege effect. Right? Protege effect is basically um, as you teach, you learn. That's sum and substance of it is that that it's a little more layered than what I just meant it, what I just enunciated. But what it basically means, and this is where the leader stroke manager 10 or 20 years ago, when we used to ask them to come and coach people or train people or come into a class and teach, etc., that was more from a knowledge sharing perspective. Right? Today, it is more from a questioning perspective. It's not that I have all the answers and I'm coming in and therefore thou shalt all listen to me and take notes. That's not the case. It is more about, look, guys, how do we figure this out? It's more about unlearning, and it's as much about as managers teach, they realize that they can learn. So all this constructs around reverse mentoring, or whether it's getting managers to teach or leaders to come and coach, or all of this is primarily the protege effect at work. But more importantly, and this is a deep belief that I have, is this whole thing of showing vulnerability. The more leaders and managers are out there with the crew learning together, right? And it's opening up that part of it which say, hey, I don't know, let's figure this out together, rather than saying that, I know it's a secret, I'm not going to tell you, or you go learn it the hard way and come up the same way that I have done, because we none of us have time to play any of those games anymore. And the structures are changing. In a network organization, you cannot wait for everything to filter up or whatever, right? It's all of us together jumping into the pool and figuring it out as we go along. So I really want to reinforce what Prasenjit said, that unless managers and leaders jump in there and are co-learners, and even when they are teaching, are learning and are showing that vulnerability, that's going to be a critical construct of how to get greater, certainly followership, but also greater learning going. Back to your project.
I couldn't agree more, because I think if I reflect back on my best learning experiences, those were experiences when we had leaders coming in and talking to us and sharing their experiences or learnings, mistakes very authentically, right? And that, I think, to your point, I remember to this day, even though it's been maybe 10 years ago. And it has a profound impact on learners when you see your leader kind of come and talk to you, share experiences, learn with you. I think it's couldn't agree more, Prasanjit and Anand, with both of you. And I just realized that it's been 45 minutes since we started chatting. I didn't realize how the time flew. So I do want to make sure we have enough time to answer some of the questions that are coming in from our audience as well. I think the first question that I'm asking, Anand, maybe you to begin with, and Prasanjit, please feel free to add on, is a little bit of more of a zoom out question, which is about, how do organizations assess effectiveness
Oh,
of learning, right, in ecosystems like this? So any thoughts, Anand, from your perspective, and then Prasanjit, please add on.
sure. Um, so I think there are many, as you all know, the experts would know, there are many models available to assess training of effectiveness. Named after very many people that have. So I'll park all those aside. Those are all available. You can ask Prasanjit's Google uncle to help you with that, and it'll give you 23 different frameworks on assessing effectiveness. But here's the thing: there is no, in my opinion, generic effectiveness measure that you can try and slap on to individual organization needs. I think that what we're all looking for is some silver bullet which has worked for GE. Let's take that, or which has worked for IBM, or which has worked for TCS, and let's go implement that. My first advice is don't create your own effectiveness measure, because every, like Leo Tolstoy said, I would like to sort of take some poetic liberty here. He said that every happy family is alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So similarly, training effectiveness, I don't want to call it either a happy effect or an unhappy effect. It will be unique. So the first thing is this construct of ROI is getting dismantled. This hard dollar ROI, where I spend $1,000 on learning every year. What is the net impact can I get on what do you call my either revenues or operating profit or whatever it is? That is certainly going away with organizations, because they've realized that it's a fallacy. And I can go into a long-winded answer as to why you don't want to do that. But suffice to say that if you look at most leading organizations, they're not looking at at that at all. Instead, they're looking at three simple constructs. One is, are your leaders who are sending you to the learning, etc., saying that I notice a significant fillip, an uptick in you when you come back to work? It's a very qualitative question. It is a very serious question that needs to be deconstructed and answered, but it's a very critical question that you need to lead with, because you send me into that learning program for a particular purpose. When I come back, do you see, and don't ask them immediately, not 3 days from when I finish, but even if it's a self-paced online program or whatever, executive MBA, it doesn't matter what kind of intensity, but a few months later or a certain period of time later, right? That's one. Ask the manager or leader or whatever, whether this guy or girl has actually sort of learned and improved. The second, which is in our opinion, and certainly in my opinion far more critical, is, ask this person, will you put this on your CV? Not as a certification. Okay, if this wasn't a certification, many people are after certifications. So if it is after this university or that one, then I will add it on my CV. If it is only my company doing this, I won't put it on my CV. Forget all that. But would you put this on your CV? Meaning, do you think that the recruiter that you're going to go talk to next sees value in it? And that's an honest discussion to have with them. And that can only be had by the line manager and the subordinate, and that's an encouragement that I strongly give managers, is please sit down at the end of the year with the CV of your employee, of your subordinate, and say, have I in the last year added value overall through work, but also through learning? That's sort of the second metric. The third, of course, is organizationally. There are many competency measures and all of that. So the traditional metrics, I'm not dissing all of them completely, but the traditional metrics do continue to apply. That is the L&D professional or the L&D functions thing. Have we lifted together a cohort of people and have their proficiency levels improved, etc.? So those would be the three. Other than whatever else suits your particular organizational need, I would encourage you to consider these three. Back to you, Pradeep.
Thanks, Anand. Prasenjit, anything you wanted to add from your perspective on this?
No, I think a lot of stuff is already known to L&D professionals in terms of how do you measure. For example, any good organization, and for some strange reason, I have seen this more in IT and manufacturing, they would today have the competency bank of all their employees. They know exactly what are those competencies at what level, which employee is there, and so on and so forth. And then there is a layer on top of that which is somewhat more difficult, which is like people leadership and areas like that, which also gets measured indirectly through surveys and all of that. I think the leadership pipeline is a very big question. If you're constantly having to go outside for your leaders, even though you are not doubling every year, then there is a issue in return on investment that you have. I think, however, the bigger question is somewhat different. You see, all of these questions make an assumption that the organization is the customer, and therefore it has the right to ask, if I'm spending money, what am I getting? And this is, I think, a very valid way of looking at learning and development. But increasingly, I think what is happening is, instead of saying is that the resource is the human being that has to be used or leveraged to achieve the potential of the organization, I think we don't have a choice. The resource is the organization that has to be leveraged and used to achieve the potential of the individual human being. And in the process, as an outcome, the business growth and profits and everything else will happen, hopefully. But if we don't change that mindset, I think we are gone, because people see through that very fast. Right. Today, when I do a counseling session with my colleagues or my young team members, gone are the days where I say, oh my God, if I can somehow convince this person to also do this and, take up this responsibility, I have to completely put myself in the shoes of that person and say, and this is a last point I'm going to make very quickly. A whole bunch of directors of public sector units, from energy sector. They came and they invited me and they said, we have a problem that we have people from the IIMs and others. We pay them really well in at par with private sector, but they don't stay with us and they don't want to go to those locations where we have refineries or power plants and so on and so forth. Right now, the only question that I asked is, how many of you have children who are teenagers or above? All of them raised their hands because they've grown up children. So I said, the hand on your heart, how many of you would advise your children to come and join your own organization, which, by the way, is very good organization. These are good organizations, and I didn't find a single hand. I mean, it helped that just before going to the session, the director HR said that my son is in Google and stuff like that. So the limited point that I'm trying to make is that the return on investment is a valid kind of question. It is looking at uh, organization as the customer who has to therefore ask for that return, but that mindset itself has to change. We don't have a choice, we don't have an option, because today it is no longer about great place to work generation or employee experience. Today, sitting in Tinsukia, I can work for any multinational anywhere in the world without changing my table, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, if you are not making sense for me, then I would probably have options.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, I went about it a little bit roundabout
No,
manner.
no, no, no. I think it makes a lot of sense, Prasenjit, and I think Projekta, you'd agree, and Prasenjit, so would you, that we've all realized over a period of time that the most important part of a performance management process is not the year-end appraisal, but the goal setting. The
Yeah.
better your goal setting is, the sharper it is, the tighter it is, then the easier the rest of the year and the final conversation becomes, because that's just a matter of did you or didn't you. But what are you? So, similarly for learning, why are we doing this? What is the purpose with which we are embarking on this learning journey, either as individuals or as an organization or a function or whatever the denominator is? That is up to you. But once that is very, very clear, then effectiveness then is just a matter of measuring it appropriately, right?
Yeah.
But why we don't go why? We simply, okay, so the latest thing seems to be storytelling. Okay, send everybody. Okay, but then you say, okay, I didn't learn anything or it wasn't effective. Well, I'm just giving a very sort of a
Hmm.
tactile or a visceral example, and you stretch that to anything, technical, functional, whatever, all of that. The same thing. Why are we doing this? And for both the organization and for the individual, and therefore the measurement becomes easier. Back to you, project.
Awesome. I think, lots of learning for me personally as well as I listen to both of you. One final question, which is since we have just about 5 minutes to go, what is the one advice you would like to leave our audience with, especially if anyone is interested in getting into the L&D space?
Sure. Prasenjit, Da, go first.
So I think gone are the days where, because our entire life we are used to three things. We are used to a professor, we are used to a curriculum, and we are used to an examination. And I think that system is gone, which means that the biggest driver for an L&D professional is how can I and others move from passive to an active mindset. And we are still encouraging passive mindset in everything that you do. You do an employee survey, your statement will say, my manager does this, my manager makes expectations clear. And what do I do? I sit back and give him a rating. Now that is the most passive of behavior that you are trying to encourage by just even doing an employee survey. And I think we have to make all of those far more active, so that there is at least 50% responsibility on me to build my own career and my own growth, and not just depend on organization.
Thank you.
Project. So I'll again, I'll go a little bit back to come forward. So I used to be in consulting, and after a long career, then ultimately I became the managing partner of one of the consulting firms. So I used to say this quite often, and I'm going to reverse that. Um, you've heard the famous adage, right? Those that can
Yeah.
do, right? Those that can do. Those that can't do,
Teach.
teach. Those that can't do or teach,
Consult.
consult. Those that can't do or teach or consult, become managing partners of consulting firms. Okay, so I'm going to now I'm reversing my career. I'm coming back from managing partner to a functioning consultant, and then now I'm back into line. I work for an organization where I actually have real responsibilities, and I teach and I enjoy myself. And the only advice I have for L&D professionals is other than whatever Prasenjit has covered, I think, which is all extremely valid. And Prajakta, you also mentioned a couple of things right up top when we started, is that this is if you look at learning as a function, you will have some functional inputs and some functional outputs. But I think that learning for the foreseeable future, and it's always been that way, we've always said, the Gurukul shapes people, mindsets, thinking, it sets you up for your life, and that's what it's all about. And somewhere that's remained rhetoric. So the L&D professionals that I've seen who've been disproportionately successful, who've had wild success, have had one thing. Many, each one is individual, of course, but many things different. But one thing in common is the passion of purpose of actually growing the people to grow the business and not the other way around. That growing the people to growing the business and therefore needing people to grow it is very, very, very functional. But growing people so that tomorrow they'll go and the business will explode in a nice way. It'll be fantastic for the individual. And if that mindset they come with, those are the phenomenal L&D people that I've seen. There are 100 other competencies that you need, which we all know about, but that's the one, in my opinion, that's the one little nugget that if we can genuinely be motivated by that purpose, I think it's a very, very powerful one. Back to you, Prajakta.
Anand, Prasanjit, I think absolutely brilliant. I just enjoyed the 1 hour that went by so quickly, so much with both of you. I was personally making notes as well, things that I will follow up with, maybe read up on, learn more about myself. Appreciate everything that you guys have shared over the last 1 hour across different aspects of learning and the learning ecosystem that is metamorphosing as we talk, right? And I'll just leave the audience with one final motto of mine, which for me resonates because I'm in the learning space as well, which is your mind is like a parachute; it functions only when open. So, with that, Isha, back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, dear panelists. It was a great learning session. And each and every input given by you all are surely going to help us. And like Prajakta ma'am, we have also penned down the couple of great learnings. So thank you again. It was indeed a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks, Isha, and thanks to NHRD. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye.
So, dear all, before we go for a quick lunch break until 2 p.m., I thank our title sponsors: Platinum sponsor ONGC, Silver sponsor Zozo Day, JSW, and White Crow Research, Associate sponsors ICICI Bank, Indian Oil, NTPC, Mahindra, World at Work India, and Balmer Lorry. Knowledge partner Mercer, and communication and design partner Fulki. Thank you so much for supporting us. This was indeed not possible without your assistance. Thank you. I request my team to present in front of us the HR job portal, which we have launched yesterday. And I think it is going to be a great platform for budding HRs and professionals to not hunt for HR jobs here and there. We have got a platform by ourselves. So this video will be played in loop until we are back from our lunch. And I'm expecting the same energy and amazing responses from all you attendees. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead. Also keep the Q&A section active. You all have been recorded and waiting to see some amazing people getting some amazing awards for their contribution in making this session a great success. Let us be back from our lunch breaks. Thank you.